Madam President, I thank the senator from Oklahoma for his leadership on this issue, for yielding the time, and appreciate everything that he has done to bring Senate Joint Resolution 37 to the floor of the United States Senate. Madam President, as the father of two daughters, I want a cleaner, safer, and healthier environment for their generation and for future generations. And thanks to the common sense policies that balance economic growth with a cleaner environment, our country has made significant progress toward improving the quality of our air and our water. We've made progress under Republican presidents, and we've made progress under Democrat presidents. We've made progress during Democrat control of the Senate and Republican control of the Senate. But, Madam President, what the Obama administration is doing with this regulation and with many of the other their policies that pertain to energy is pursuing an ideologically driven agenda in which the costs far outweigh the benefits. He promised that his energy plan would necessarily make electricity costs skyrocket, and his policies are clearly delivering on that promise. A prime example of that flawed agenda is Utility MACT, which is the most expensive regulation in EPA's history with an estimated cost of $10 billion. These are costs that we passed on to families and small businesses across the country at a time when we're experiencing the worst economic recovery in over 60 years. Madam President, we all know the statistics. Unemployment's been at 8% now for 40 consecutive months. Real unemployment is above 14%. There are 23 million Americans who are not working today. Madam President, 5.4 million Americans have remained out of work for over a year. And despite these facts, President Obama continues to push regulations like Utility MACT that are going to make energy more expensive and at the same time destroy good-paying jobs. According to the National Economic Research Associates, Utility MACT will cost between 180,000 and 215,000 jobs by the year 2015. When including President Obama's other regulations on the electric power sector, the United States stands to lose approximately 1.65 million jobs by the year 2020. Madam President, we simply cannot afford these politically driven regulations at a time when 23 million Americans remain unemployed or underemployed. Madam President, low-income and middle-class families are the ones who are going to get hit hardest by the administration's actions. Families that earn less than $50,000 already spend 21% of their income on energy costs compared to 9% for those making more than $50,000. Now, thanks to the EPA's regulatory actions, those costs are going to go up an average of 6.5% and as much as 19% in some areas. Middle-class incomes have already fallen by over $4,300 these past 3 years, and now President Obama wants to further burden them with higher energy costs. These higher energy costs are not some far-off projection. In many cases, these costs are already being realized. And as an example, PJM, which is a regional transmission organization that coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity in 13 states in the District of Columbia. In their May 2012 capacity auction, PJM reported two-year capacity price increases of 390%. PJM is reporting a nearly tenfold increase in wholesale energy costs in northern Ohio. According to one of their spokespersons, capacity prices were higher than last year's because of retirements of existing coal-fired generation, resulting largely from environmental regulations which go into effect in the year 2015. The result could cause electricity bills across the PJM region to increase by up to $130 and potentially much higher in places like northern Ohio. In addition to electricity rates, EPA's agenda will drive up the cost of food, transportation, fuels, and manufactured goods as those costs get passed on across all the sectors of the economy. The end result, Madam President, is more pain for the middle class, slower economic growth, and fewer jobs. Now, Madam President, the President of the United States, President Obama, likes to talk a lot about fairness. And I would ask my colleagues, is it fair that unaccountable EPA bureaucrats are going to drive up utility bills by up to 19%? Is it fair that manufacturers are going to have to pay higher energy bills rather than hire new workers? Is it fair that small towns across the Midwest are already being devastated by coal plant closings on account of regulations from the Obama administration? And is it fair that thousands of workers are going to be laid off and are going to lose not only their paychecks, but their employer-provided health care coverage as well? For most South Dakotans and millions of hardworking taxpayers across the country, I believe the answer is that the consequences of these regulations are inherently unfair. They penalize hardworking middle-class Americans. In the case of utility MACT, consumers are going to pay a heavy price for President Obama's political agenda to restrict access to the abundant and affordable sources of domestic energy that we possess in this country. Madam President, most Americans believe regulations should work for consumers and not against consumers. Unfortunately, EPA bureaucrats have drafted the utility MACT regulation in an inefficient and unworkable manner. Utility MACT's new source standards are so strict they cannot possibly be met. According to the Institute of Clean Air Companies, the Pro-Environmental Trade Association, comprising nearly 100 suppliers of air pollution equipment, utility MACT makes it, and I quote, nearly impossible to construct new coal-fired units because financing of such units requires guarantees from equipment suppliers that all emissions limits can be met, end quote. Madam President, there has got to be a better approach. Senate Joint Resolution 37, which would force a rewrite of utility MACT, is the only solution to address the rule's problems. It is time to rewrite utility MACT in a manner that better balances economic growth with environmental protection. And I would hope today, Madam President, that we will have a majority of our colleagues here in the United States Senate that will support SJ Res 37. Doing so will send a strong message to the Obama administration that the United States Senate will not stand by and watch his regulatory agenda further hurt small businesses and middle-class families, making it more expensive and more difficult for businesses in this country to create jobs. That is the end result of this regulation. It is the end result of many of the energy policies and regulations that are coming out of this administration. And, Madam President, that has to stop. We have got to get Americans back to work. We've got to get our economy growing again. Madam President, I yield the floor.